They said humanity was late to the stars. That by the time our species reached out beyond our sun, the galaxy was already claimed, mapped, and ordered. Empires had risen, coalitions had. Alliances and treaties carved the heavens into neat little borders. So when the first human vessel drifted out of the void, the galaxy thought little of it. A primitive world, a backwater species, too fragile to matter. But then, something strange happened. The aliens stared. Because the human ship didn't retreat. Most young species trembled before the sight of larger fleets. They bent their knees, begged for protection, or vanished back into the darkness. But humanity, they smiled. No one understood it at first. That strange, reckless expression. That grin of defiance when surrounded by weapons that could end them in an instant. It unsettled the galaxy more than the ship itself. Because the question began to echo in every council chamber, every war room, every throne. What kind of species smiles at certain death? The records say the first human warship was spotted on the edge of the expanse. A barren stretch of space where empires tested weapons and smaller civilizations vanished quietly, never to be spoken of again. It should have been an ending. Instead, it was the beginning. They called it a warship, though by galactic standards it was crude, rough, almost unfinished. Its hull bore the scars of rushed construction. Its engines howled like a beast barely tamed. And yet, there was something different. It was not the steel, not the guns, not the numbers. It was the way it moved. Deliberate. Certain. Alive. The scouts watched in silence as the human ship advanced into restricted territory. They hailed it, warned it, threatened it. But the humans simply kept coming. When the scouts demanded identification, the answer was short. Clear. Chilling. This is the Terran warship Resolute. Resolute. The word carried no translation in most alien tongues. The closest meanings were fragments, unyielding, stubborn, unbreakable. But it was more than a name. It was a promise. The galaxy, for all its power, had forgotten what that word meant. 1,000 civilizations had risen and fallen in the cold emptiness of time. They learned caution. They learned compromise. They learned to bend, to survive a little longer beneath the boots of stronger neighbors. But humans had learned something else. To suffer and endure. To bleed and still stand. To look at impossible odds and laugh. That was what unsettled them most. Not the weapons, not the technology, not even the audacity of trespassing into forbidden space. It was that laugh. That smile. That terrifying refusal to break. The scouts opened fire. And for a heartbeat, it looked as though the story would end as quickly as it began. Streams of plasma lit the void, hammering into human steel. The alien crews expected surrender. They expected silence. They expected the human ship to finally understand. But when the fire cleared, the Resolute was still there. Scorched, burning, but alive. And in that moment, something impossible happened. The warship did not retreat. It did not falter. It advanced. The reports say the crews felt something they had never known before. Fear. Not fear of death, not fear of defeat. But fear of something deeper. Fear of a species that did not know when to stop. The human warship was not stronger. It was not faster. It was not superior in any measurable way. And yet it kept coming. Every shot they fired only seemed to harden its will. Every wound only seemed to fuel its determination. And the galaxy realized, too late, that they were not watching a battle. They were watching a message. A single ship. A single word. A single species saying to the stars, "We are here and we will not stop." That night, across 100 empires and 1,000 councils, the whispers spread. What are they? How can they fight like this? What drives them? And one quiet, terrible truth began to take root in the hearts of the galaxy's rulers. If this was only their first warship, then it was already too late to stop humanity. They told the captain he was already dead, that no ship could survive the blockade, that no crew could endure such odds. He heard the warnings. He knew the math. And still he smiled. Then we'll teach them what dead men can do. The message from the Resolute spread faster than light itself. Intercepted transmissions, grainy sensor footage, half-finished reports whispered across smuggler dens and military academies alike. To most, it was impossible. No vessel that fragile should have pierced territory, no species that young should have dared. But impossibility meant nothing to humans. The captain had told his crew the same thing before they entered the expanse. They'll think we can't, that's the point, that's why we will. And the crew believed him, not because of statistics, not because of firepower, but because he was human, and he said it with that same reckless conviction that had carried their kind across oceans, mountains, deserts, and now, across the void. The galaxy, however, was not impressed. The council chambers of the Dominion dismissed it as a rumor. The hierarchy called it propaganda. They issued formal reports declaring the Resolute destroyed, its wreckage scattered to the stars. But the truth lingered. Merchant convoys whispered of a human warship limping through the dark, refusing to die. Pirate bands claimed they had seen it blaze past, wounded but unyielding, engines burning brighter than ever. And in the quiet places of the galaxy, those forgotten outposts where hope was a fragile thing, the whispers turned into something dangerous. A story of a ship that would not fall. A story of a species that would not kneel. They could not allow it. For centuries they had ruled by fear. Their fleets were vast, their technology unchallenged. But fear only works if it is absolute. A single crack in the illusion, a single act of defiance could spread like wildfire. And so they sent more ships, not scouts this time, warships, entire squadrons tasked with hunting one fragile human vessel. When the reports came back, they were incomplete. Some said the Resolute had been destroyed in a blaze of glory, its crew refusing to surrender until the very last breath. Others claimed it had vanished into a storm of nebulae, never to be seen again. But the most troubling reports were the ones that couldn't be silenced. Because again and again patrols vanished, entire hunter-killer groups stopped responding, and every time, whispers spread that a battered human warship had been sighted, alive. It should have been impossible. It should have been over. And yet the story grew stronger. Alien captains began to dread the name. Resolute. Not because of its weapons, not because of its speed, but because it kept coming back. They fired, it endured. They cornered it, it escaped. They broke it, it rebuilt itself with sheer stubborn will. Every time it reappeared, and smoking, it carried the same unspoken message. Try harder. The question began to haunt the galaxy. What kind of species produces warriors like this? What kind of culture teaches its children to look at death and grin? The scholars searched history. They uncovered fragments, wars that consumed continents, disasters that should have ended humanity but didn't, times when the human race should have vanished, yet rose stronger instead. The answer was clear. Humans did not fear endings. They made them beginnings. On the bridge of the Resolute, the crew felt it too. They were tired, bloodied, running on scraps of fuel and half-broken systems. Every breath was pain, every victory costly. But none of them turned back. None of them surrendered. Because their captain had told them something else, something that echoed through the ship like a second heartbeat. They will never understand, and that is why we'll win. And so the galaxy watched. At first with scorn, then with confusion, and finally with dread. Because if one broken warship could defy an empire, what would happen when all of humanity arrived? The council chamber was silent. A silence that carried weight, fear, and something far worse, uncertainty. They presented their evidence first. Projected images, sensor logs, fragments of human transmissions. The vessel is crippled, their admiral declared. It cannot last, one more coordinated strike and it will be finished. But the words rang hollow, because everyone in that chamber had heard the same stories, seen the same fragments. The human warship was always finished. And yet it always returned. One delegate leaned forward, his tendrils coiling tight. You call it crippled, I call it persistent. Tell me, Admiral, how do you destroy a species that refuses to understand it is already dead? No answer came. Only the quiet hum of the chamber's air systems and the nervous shifting of diplomats who had ruled the stars for centuries. Outside those grand halls, the story spread faster than any fleet could travel. Smugglers passed it along in hushed tones. Slaves whispered it in the dark, imagining a day when ships like the Resolute would come for them. Even soldiers of rival empires spoke of it, some with awe, some with dread, and some with a secret spark of hope. They said the humans laughed. That even in the heat of battle, when the Resolute burned and bulkheads ruptured, the crew did not cry out in despair. They joked. They told one another that it could be worse. That at least the coffee machine still works. That if we're going to hell, we're taking the scenic route. No one understood it. Humor had no place in war. In the galaxy's long memory, laughter was for the safe, the victorious, the untouchable, not for those standing on the edge of annihilation. But humans laughed anyway. The loyalty was stranger still. On more than one occasion, the Resolute was given a chance to flee. Damaged but mobile, it could have escaped to the neutral zones, abandoned its mission, and saved the crew. Yet not once did they abandon their captain. Not once did they abandon one another. Reports claimed that wounded crew members crawled back to their posts, refusing medical stasis until their stations were manned. That engineers fought with bare hands to keep the ship alive when machines failed. That gunners, bleeding and blind, called out firing solutions as though nothing mattered more than standing together. The galaxy could not understand such madness. Why fight when defeat was inevitable? Why die for one another when surrender meant survival? The answer was simple. Because they were human. In the nebulae beyond the expanse, a new legend began to take shape. They called it the Ghost of the Void. A warship too stubborn to die. A crew too loyal to abandon one another. A captain who smiled in the face of doom and dared the stars themselves to try harder. Empires dismissed it publicly, but in private they planned. They plotted. They prepared for a future where humanity might arrive not with one warship, but with hundreds, thousands. And on the bridge of the Resolute, the captain stood in silence. The hull groaned around him, lights flickered. His crew worked in weary, practiced motions. They had all heard the transmissions. They knew their names had become whispers across the stars. But the captain did not revel in it. He did not boast. He only stared at the endless night beyond the viewport as if measuring the galaxy itself. They think we're legends now, he said at last. His voice was calm, almost amused. They're wronged. His crew turned to him, waiting. We're not legends, he continued. We're just the beginning. The galaxy shivered. Because deep down, every ruler, every admiral, every tyrant knew. He was right. And if humanity's beginning looked like this, then no empire would ever be safe again. The alien commander stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human ship should have been gone. It was gone by every calculation, every law of probability. And yet there it was. Bleeding, burning, fighting. The fleet had done everything right. They had surrounded the Resolute. They had cut off every escape. They had fired until the void itself glowed with radiation. And still the humans refused to die. The commander saw it happen, when one of the human gunners collapsed at his station, chest heaving, blood staining the controls. Another crewman, barely standing himself, dragged the body aside and sat down without a word. No hesitation. No demand for recognition. Just one more human taking the place of another, so the ship could keep breathing. The aliens didn't understand. Why fight for a vessel already doomed? Why give your life for something that could not survive? But the humans did not ask such questions. They simply acted. In the bowels of the ship, deep where the engines screamed like tortured beasts, an engineer named Corin knew the truth. The core was failing. One more hit and the entire ship would tear itself apart. He could reroute power manually, but to do it he would have to stay behind. The others begged him not to. There had to be another way. There was always another way. But Corin only smiled, tired and steady. Someone has to hold the line, that's me. He reached out, grease-stained fingers brushing against his arms in quiet farewell. Then he turned, stepped into the maintenance shaft and sealed the bulkhead behind him. The captain knew. He didn't ask. He didn't order. He simply bowed his head as the engines stabilized and the ship lurched forward once more. And in that moment, the Resolute lived because one man chose to die. The crew said nothing. They didn't wail, they didn't scream. But the silence carried a weight heavier than any words. The commander reported the engagement as a victory. The human ship had retreated into the storm of a nebula, vanishing from sensors. The commander assured his superiors it was crippled beyond repair, destined to be lost in the void. But even as he spoke, his voice faltered. Because he had seen their faces. Because he had heard their laughter, even as their ship burned. Because he had witnessed a single human step willingly into death, so that others might live. That was not something he could explain to his people. The story spread. An engineer named Corin, a name the galaxy should never have known, became more than a man. He became a symbol. To some, he was a warning, proof that humans were not bound by reason, not shackled by survival. To others, he was hope, a light in the dark, a reminder that sacrifice could mean more than defeat, that it could ignite something larger. And to the rulers of the galaxy, he was terror. Because how do you fight an enemy who welcomes sacrifice? How do you break a species that sees death not as an end, but as fuel? On the bridge of the Resolute, the captain stood before his weary crew. They had not buried Corin. There was no time, no ground to lay him to rest upon. But in the silence of the ship, the captain spoke words that echoed through every corridor. He did not die for nothing. He did not die for victory. He died for us. And as long as we breathe, his choice lives on. The crew straightened. Broken bodies, exhausted eyes. But in that moment, something unshakable bound them than steel. The galaxy had always believed strength was measured in firepower, in numbers, in fleets stretching across the stars. But humanity was teaching them a different truth. Strength was sacrifice. Strength was loyalty. Strength was the refusal to let death be the final word. And somewhere in the shadows of that endless night, an empire trembled. Because if this was how humans fought with one ship, what would happen when their armadas came? The chamber was full. Delegates from empires that had not spoken in centuries now gathered shoulder to shoulder. The agenda was clear: humanity. The admiral thundered first. They are reckless, suicidal. One warship should not matter, yet it does. Already our patrols hesitate. Already our borders shake. We must crush them before the infection spreads. But across the table, a philosopher only hissed softly. You call it infection, I call it something else. What? The admiral spat. Hope. The word fell like a stone in water, rippling outward in silence. Hope was dangerous. Hope was contagious. Hope could turn slaves into rebels, subjects into soldiers, and allies into enemies overnight. And now hope bore a name. Resolute. Reports grew by the day. A freighter crippled by pirates claimed a human ship had emerged from the void, bleeding smoke, but still strong enough to drive their attackers away. A colony at the edge of the expanse swore they saw the same vessel pass overhead, patched together with mismatched plating, but alive. And then there were the stories no one could dismiss, sent out with overwhelming strength that never returned. The official records blamed malfunctions, storms, even internal mutiny. But everyone knew the truth. The Resolute still lived. On its bridge, the captain watched his crew move like ghosts. They were exhausted. Some bore wounds that would never heal. The ship itself was a patchwork miracle, alive only because its people refused to let it die. And yet in their eyes he saw something else. Not despair, not resignation, but fire. A spark that grew each time the galaxy tried and failed to kill them. A fire that turned silence into laughter, fear into defiance. The aliens could not understand it. A strategist leaned forward in the council chamber, voice low and cold. They are not rational. Every calculation says they should surrender, but they will not. Why? And the answer came from the voices, an old archivist, scales faded with age. Because you are calculating wrong, he said. You measure the galaxy in territory, in fleets, in power. They measure it in one another. To them, one life given for many is not loss. It is victory. The room erupted in protest, but the truth lingered. They all felt it. The humans were not fighting for resources. They were fighting for each other. And that made them unstoppable. Meanwhile, the crew of the Resolute gathered in the mess. The air smelled of smoke and recycled filters. Metal groaned. They had little food, less water. But still, someone cracked a joke. Still, someone laughed. Still, someone raised a cup of stale coffee and toasted to Corin, the engineer who had given everything so they could sit here now. And somehow, impossibly, the laughter spread. The captain listened from the doorway, his chest heavy. He knew what the galaxy never would. That the secret to humanity's survival was not their weapons. It was nights like this. Nights where despair should have ruled, but laughter burned brighter instead. The alien councils sent fleets. They drafted plans. They whispered of quarantines, extermination, war. But deep down, they already knew the truth. The humans had crossed a line. They were no longer just another species. They were a story. And stories could not be killed. The captain stood on the bridge, staring into the void. He knew the galaxy was hunting them. He knew more battles lay ahead. But he also knew this. Every empire had heard the name of his ship. Every ruler feared the fire in his crew's hearts. And somewhere out in the endless dark, other humans were already coming. "We're not alone anymore," he murmured. And the stars themselves seemed to shiver. The nebula burned with light. Not the calm shimmer of distant stars, but the violent flash of weapons fire, tearing holes into the void. The Resolute was trapped. Again. But this time the trap was perfect. 5 cruisers, 3 frigates, a swarm of drones that filled the dark like locusts. The galaxy had waited for this moment. At last the legend would end. The first salvo struck like thunder. The Resolute staggered, armor shearing away, bulkheads splitting open to the cold. Sparks rained across the bridge. The crew held their ground. "Return fire," the captain said. His voice was calm, too calm. Cannons roared. Missiles screamed into the dark. The human warship clawed back with everything it had, defiance given form in steel and flame. But the numbers were merciless. Every hit weakened them. Every counterattack drained their strength. By every calculation, the fight was already over. The commander leaned back in his chair, watching the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. "This is how the story ends," he murmured. "No smiles this time, no ghosts, just wreckage." But then something strange happened. The humans kept smiling. On the bridge of the Resolute, the crew bled, their ship falling apart around them. And still, they laughed. A gunner, clutching his side, grinned through the pain. "Captain, I bet you 10 credits we last another 5 minutes." Another voice called back, strained but steady. "Make it 10 minutes and you're buying the drinks." The captain almost smiled himself, almost, because he knew what they were doing. They weren't joking for themselves. They were joking so the others could keep fighting. Humor as armor. Laughter as defiance. And it worked. Down in engineering, the spirit of Corin lived on. His replacement, a young mechanic barely out of training, screamed into the comms. "Don't you dare give up on me up there. I'm not patching this mess together for nothing." The ship groaned, shuddered, but still held. Every human aboard poured themselves into it, not because they believed they would survive, but because they refused to stop. The commander's confidence faltered. Why did they still fight? Why did they still smile? And then he understood the truth, too late. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to endure. To make a statement that would echo long after the Resolute was gone. The galaxy watched. Every listening post. Every spy satellite. Every desperate smuggler tuned to the hidden frequencies humans always seemed to find. They heard the laughter. They saw the fire. And something dangerous spread. Hope. The battle raged on. The Resolute was ripped open, decks collapsing into the void. Half her systems were gone. Still, she fired. One cruiser fell. Then another's. Not by power, but by persistence. By sheer, relentless refusal to break. The commander screamed for his forces to finish it. But already the fear had spread. His ships fought less like predators and more like prey, desperate to put down the beast that refused to die. On the Resolute, the captain stood among the smoke and ruin. He knew this could be their end. But he also knew endings never meant the same thing to humans. "Transmit this," he said, voice steady, "to every frequency, every channel, every listening ear in the galaxy." The comms officer, bloodied but alive, nodded. "What should I send, sir?" The captain smiled, just enough to unsettle anyone who would hear his words. "Tell them we're still here." And across the galaxy, trillions heard it. 3 words. Simple, unyielding. We're still here. For some, it was defiance. For others, a challenge. But for many, it was salvation. They fled that day. Not because they could not win, but because they finally understood they could never truly defeat the humans. The Resolute limped away once more, a corpse of steel and fire. But alive. Always alive. And in every council, in every empire, in every dark corner of the galaxy, the same realization spread like wildfire. If this is how one ship fights, what happens when humanity brings a fleet? The silence after battle was worse than the fight itself. No gunfire. No alarms. Just the hollow groan of a wounded ship, drifting through the void like a ghost. The Resolute had survived again. But survival was a thin word. Half her decks were gone. Dozens of her crew would never rise again. And those who lived bore wounds that no medic could ever truly heal. Still they breathed. And for humans, that was enough. The captain walked the corridors slowly. He passed shattered bulkheads, makeshift repairs sealed with little more than willpower. He passed crew members slumped against the walls, too tired to move but refusing to leave their posts. He passed the memorial wall, a simple slab of steel where the crew had scratched the names of the fallen with whatever tools they could find. And there at the bottom, a new name had been added, fresh, uneven, cut with trembling hands. It read, "Corin lives here." The captain paused. His hand rested against the cold metal. He closed his eyes. "They'll never understand us," he whispered, "and that's why they'll never beat us." In the mess, what remained of the crew gathered. Food was scarce, water rationed, air filters barely holding together. And yet someone had found a bottle, half empty, cracked, but intact. The bottle passed from hand to hand. A toast to Corin, to the gunners lost in the last battle, to the mechanic who held a bulkhead closed with his bare hands long enough for others to escape. They did not drink to victory. They drank to one another. And when the bottle was gone, they laughed. Not because anything was funny. Not because the galaxy was kind. They laughed because laughter was theirs. Because it was the one thing the void could never take. In the quiet after, the youngest among them spoke. "Why do we keep fighting?" she asked. Her voice was small but steady. "We've lost so much. Why not run? Why not hide?" The mess fell silent. Dozens of weary eyes turned to the captain. He thought of the battles, the blood, the endless darkness. And then softly he smiled. "Because someone has to show them," he said. "Show them what?" the girl asked. "That there are still things worth dying for." The galaxy could not comprehend this. In council chambers far away, rulers argued in circles. Some demanded annihilation. Some begged for caution. And some, quietly, secretly, wondered if humanity might be the spark their own people had long forgotten. But aboard the Resolute, there was no debate. There was only choice. And every man and woman aboard had already made it. The ship drifted in silence for days, repairs made with bare hands, systems coaxed back to life by stubbornness alone. When the engines roared again, the sound was ragged, uneven, but alive. The Resolute moved forward once more. Not because it should, not because it could, but because humans refused to let it stop. In the captain's quarters, the lights flickered. He sat at his desk, a worn photograph in his hands, a family long gone, faces blurred by time. He traced their outlines with calloused fingers and whispered to the silence, "We're still here." The words were not for the galaxy, not for the crew, but for himself. A reminders, a promise, a vow that no empire, no fleet, no endless night could break. And so the Resolute sailed on, half dead, half alive, but utterly unbroken. The galaxy whispered of it as myth. But for those aboard, it was not myth. It was family. And as long as one human drew breath within those steel walls, the fire would never die. The galaxy waited. Every empire, every ruler, every frightened citizen huddled under the weight of stars. They waited for the end of the story, for the Resolute to finally fall silent. But silence never came. Instead, a transmission spread. Not from fleets, not from polished diplomats, but from a single broken ship still limping through the void. 3 words. Simple, defiant, eternal. "We're still here." The phrase rippled outward. Through pirate dens. Through slave markets. Through colonies forgotten by their masters. And everywhere it went, it grew. Slaves whispered it in the dark, daring to dream of freedom. Soldiers murmured it in their barracks, wondering what it would mean to fight for something more than orders. Children in crumbling stations etched it on walls, believing for the first time that tomorrow might be theirs. The galaxy's rulers tried to silence it. They outlawed it. They punished those who spoke it. But the words spread anyway. Because you cannot kill a story once it has taken root. The council met in fury. The admiral pounded his fists on the table. Why does one ship matter? Why does one species matter? The answer came from a quiet voice at the end of the chamber. An old scholar, eyes clouded with age. "Because they have reminded us what we lost," he said. "They bleed and they rise, they fall and they rise. They are fire, and fire does not ask permission to burn." The chamber fell into silence, because everyone knew he was right. Meanwhile, the Resolute sailed on. The crew was broken, yet whole, yet unbowed. Each name etched on the memorial wall was a reminder of what they carried with them. Not death, but life given meaning. The captain stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the horizon of stars. His voice carried across the ship, steady as stone. They thought one ship couldn't matter, he said. They thought one crew couldn't change anything, but they were wrong. He looked at his people, tired, bloodied, smiling through it all. They don't understand yet, but they will. Across the galaxy, fleets stirred. Human colonies lit their engines. More warships were being forged, stronger, faster, deadlier. But none would ever carry the weight of the first. Because the Resolute was more than steel now. It was a promise that humanity would not kneel, that they would not break, that when the galaxy tried to end them, they would rise and say again and again, "We're still here." The galaxy realized the truth too late. They had mistaken humanity's late arrival as weakness. They had mistaken stubbornness for foolishness. They had mistaken laughter for madness. And now they saw clearly. Humans did not come to join the galaxy's order. They came to change it, to challenge it, to burn away everything that thought itself eternal and replace it with something the stars had long forgotten. Hope. The Resolute drifted into the unknown, a silhouette against the endless night. Some said it was still fighting. Some said it had become a ghost, more story than steel. But all agreed on one truth. The galaxy would never be the same. Because when the first human warship was spotted, they believed they had time to stop them. They believed humanity could be contained, crushed, erased. But now every empire, every council, every trembling tyrant whispered the same words, whether they dared admit it or not. It is far too late. Far too late to stop the laughter. Far too late to stop the fire. Far too late to stop them. And so the stars themselves seemed to bow, as if acknowledging a truth carved not in steel but in spirit. Humans were here. Humans would endure. Humans would rise. And nothing in the galaxy could ever stop them.